Elon Musk stood at the helm of an empire that had reshaped entire industries, a man celebrated as both a genius and a visionary. From Tesla to SpaceX, his accomplishments were as vast as they were transformative. Yet, despite his towering success, there were wounds from the past that hadn't fully healed, scars etched by betrayal and deceit. One of those wounds had a name: Richard Kingsley. Richard, once a promising ally during the fledgling days of Tesla, had betrayed Elon in one of the company's most critical moments. While Elon had managed to steer Tesla to unimaginable heights despite the setback, the sting of Richard's betrayal lingered. Now, years later, Richard had resurfaced, not as an ally or a rival to be underestimated, but as a threat intent on dismantling Elon's latest innovation, a sustainable energy hub poised to revolutionize global energy distribution. Elon had poured years of his life into this project, envisioning a future where clean energy was accessible to all. Richard, with his shallow bravado and calculated malice, wanted nothing more than to see it fail. Elon stared at his massive, wall-spanning monitor, where streams of data flickered. At the center of it all was a digital dossier, the culmination of weeks of private investigation into Richard's personal and professional life. It was a sordid tale. Richard's public charm masked an ugly core of vanity and prejudice. He surrounded himself with those who catered to his ego and held a notorious disdain for anyone who didn't fit the mold of his superficial ideals. Elon's lips pressed into a tight line as he read over one particularly damning segment of a report: Richard's penchant for making cutting, dismissive remarks about people who didn't meet his rigid standards of physical attractiveness. The words hit Elon harder than he expected, stirring memories of a conversation he had had with Richard in Tesla's early days. They'd been arguing about recruitment strategy when Richard had smirked and said, "Listen, Elon, you can't build a team with just brains and grit. People follow leaders who look the part. It's a shallow world, but it's the truth. If they don't fit the image, they don't belong." It was a moment that had stayed with Elon, not because it had merit, but because it was everything he despised. In Richard's world, value was skin deep, and anything else was irrelevant. Elon leaned back in his chair, his mind calculating at its usual rapid pace. Richard's superficial values weren't just his belief system. They were his armor, his greatest vulnerability. If Elon could find a way to challenge those beliefs on the largest stage possible, he could expose the man for what he truly was: a hypocrite who measured humanity by the most trivial standards. But this wasn't about humiliating Richard for the sake of revenge. No, Elon's vision extended beyond personal gratification. He saw an opportunity to demonstrate to the world the emptiness of prioritizing appearances over substance. If he could execute this plan correctly, it wouldn't just be a blow to Richard, it would be a statement that reverberated far beyond their rivalry. For this to work, Elon needed someone extraordinary. Not a business partner or a polished influencer, but a person who could stand in stark contrast to everything Richard valued. A person whose inner strength, kindness, and authenticity would make a mockery of his shallow ideals. The choice wouldn't just shape the success of the plan, it would shape the narrative Elon wanted to leave behind. He wasn't just dismantling a man's facade, he was dismantling a toxic ideology. As the city of Los Angeles buzzed with life below his office window, Elon's resolve solidified. He would find the right person, and together, they would not only take down Richard Kingsley, but also ignite a conversation the world desperately needed to have. Elon had always thrived on audacious plans, and this one would be no different. His reputation, his vision, and perhaps something deeper all depended on it. Elon Musk's search didn't take long. With his vast network and resources, he directed his team to quietly identify individuals whose qualities defied society's conventional standards of beauty, yet radiated undeniable strength and compassion. Among the profiles brought to his attention, one name stood out: Alice Munro. Alice wasn't just any candidate. She was remarkable in ways that immediately captured Elon's interest. A full-time nurse at Hopewell Charities, a nonprofit dedicated to providing healthcare for underserved communities, Alice had spent her life caring for others. She was warm, empathetic, and fiercely intelligent. But Alice had also spent years enduring the cruel judgment of a society obsessed with appearances. As a plus-sized woman, she had grown accustomed to the dismissive stares and whispered comments. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never letting others' opinions define her. Elon didn't want this meeting to feel contrived or transactional. He wanted it to feel natural. So, with the help of his assistant, he orchestrated a subtle introduction, choosing a small fundraising gala hosted by Hopewell Charities. Elon wasn't just there to meet Alice. He wanted to observe her in her element. The night of the event, the charity's banquet hall hummed with quiet conversation and the clinking of glasses. Elon, dressed in his usual understated black suit, blended into the crowd with surprising ease. He kept his eyes on Alice, watching as she moved through the room, greeting guests, thanking donors, and ensuring the event ran smoothly. She was magnetic, her laughter lighting up the room. Eventually, their paths crossed near the silent auction table. Alice was examining a framed photograph of a child with bright eyes and a wide smile, the subject of one of the nonprofit's success stories. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Elon said, his voice breaking the comfortable hum of the room. Alice turned, startled for a moment before recognizing him. Her eyes widened, a mixture of surprise and confusion flashing across her face. "Elon Musk," she said, her tone incredulous. "I didn't realize this event had such distinguished guests." Elon smiled, extending his hand. "I'm just another donor tonight, and you must be Alice Monroe. Your work here is inspiring." Alice hesitated before shaking his hand, her grip firm despite her visible skepticism. "I appreciate the kind words, but I have to admit I'm curious. How does the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX end up at a small charity gala like this?" Elon chuckled. "I like to support causes that matter. And from what I've read about Hopewell Charities, it seems like you've built something extraordinary here." Her cheeks flushed, but she kept her composure. "Thank you. It's a team effort, really. The people we serve inspire us to do more." Their conversation flowed surprisingly easily after that. Elon found himself genuinely intrigued by Alice's stories about the children she worked with, the family she helped, and the sacrifices she made to keep the charity afloat. Alice, though still wary, couldn't deny that Elon's interest seemed sincere. He wasn't just nodding politely. He asked thoughtful questions, his gaze intent and focused. By the end of the night, Elon had extended an invitation. "Alice, I'd love to continue this conversation. Maybe over dinner sometime. I have some ideas for charitable initiatives, and I think your insight could be invaluable." Alice blinked, clearly taken aback. "Dinner? With you?" "Yes," Elon said simply, his expression unreadable. For a moment, she hesitated. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, especially from someone like Elon Musk. But something in his demeanor seemed genuine, and her curiosity outweighed her reservations. "All right," she said, her voice steady. "Dinner is." As she walked away to attend to other guests, Elon watched her, feeling a small, unexpected pang of admiration. This was no longer just about the plan. Alice was far more compelling than he had anticipated. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of carefully crafted moments. Elon, true to his calculated nature, ensured that every step of his relationship with Alice played out in a way that would both build her trust and capture public attention. What began as simple dinner meetings soon turned into a series of high-profile appearances. Despite the growing media frenzy, Alice remained grounded, her focus still on her work and the lives she touched through her charity. To Elon's credit, he didn't force the pace. He allowed their connection to unfold naturally, though the endgame remained firmly in his mind. Alice's kindness and authenticity were the perfect foil to Richard's shallow worldview. Every time the tabloids speculated about their growing relationship, Elon envisioned the ultimate move in his plan. But as their bond deepened, something unexpected began to stir within him. Alice wasn't just a part of his strategy anymore. Her laughter, her resilience, and the way she spoke about her dreams lingered with him long after their conversations ended. Elon, however, pushed those feelings aside. He couldn't afford distractions, not yet. The pivotal moment came during a gala hosted by one of Elon's ventures, a grand affair attended by celebrities, politicians, and tech luminaries. Alice arrived in a striking green gown, her confidence radiating despite the judgmental glances that followed her. When she approached Elon, her warm smile breaking the tension in the room, he knew the time had come. As the event reached its peak, Elon took the microphone. The room fell silent, the buzz of conversation replaced by curious murmurs. He began with a speech about innovation and progress, themes the audience had come to expect from him. But then, his tone shifted. "Tonight," he said, his voice steady, "I want to share something personal. It's easy to talk about the future of technology and the leaps we can take as a society. But progress isn't just about what we build. It's about the values we uphold and the people we choose to stand beside." He turned toward Alice, who looked up at him with wide eyes, completely unprepared for what was coming. "Alice Munro," he said, his voice softer now, "you've shown me what true strength and compassion look like. You've reminded me of the humanity that drives everything we do. And tonight, I want to ask you," a collective gasp rippled through the crowd as Elon dropped to one knee, producing a velvet box from his pocket. "Will you marry me?" Alice's hands flew to her mouth, her face a mixture of shock and disbelief. The room erupted into a frenzy of camera flashes and whispers, the news already spreading like wildfire across social media. For a moment, Alice seemed frozen, her mind racing. This was Elon Musk, the man who had effortlessly woven himself into her life, now asking her to take a leap she hadn't even imagined. Tears welled in her eyes as she stepped forward. "Yes," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes, I'll marry you." The applause was deafening, a cacophony of approval and astonishment. Elon rose, slipping the ring onto her finger with a triumphant smile. To the world, it was a romantic spectacle unlike any other. To Alice, it was the start of a dream she never thought possible. But for Elon, amidst the cheers and congratulations, it was another calculated move in his intricate game of revenge. Even as he held Alice's hand, feeling the warmth of her touch, his mind remained fixed on the bigger picture, the moment when Richard Kingsley would be forced to face the hypocrisy that had defined his life. Still, as Elon glanced at Alice's radiant expression, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind, fleeting but undeniable. It wasn't just about Richard anymore, though he couldn't admit that to himself. Not yet. The announcement of Elon Musk's engagement to Alice Munro sent shockwaves through the media, sparking a frenzy of headlines and debates across television panels, podcasts, and social media platforms. The tech mogul's unexpected choice of partner was dissected endlessly. For some, it was a heartwarming tale of love defying societal norms. For others, it became a lightning rod for cruel jokes and shallow criticisms. Alice, who had always lived a quiet and private life, now found herself thrust into a glaring spotlight. The scrutiny was relentless. Comment sections overflowed with cruel remarks about her appearance, often from faceless trolls who seemed to revel in their anonymity. Public events were no reprieve either. Paparazzi would angle their shots to emphasize her size, and whispers followed her wherever she went. Through it all, Alice tried to maintain her composure. "They don't know me," she would tell herself in moments of doubt. But even her iron will couldn't shield her completely from the pain. Nights grew longer as she lay awake, replaying the harsh words she couldn't unhear. Elon, for his part, appeared unfazed by the uproar. He treated Alice with the same attentiveness as always, accompanying her to public appearances, holding her hand when cameras flashed, and smiling warmly in interviews. Yet privately, his demeanor remained calculating. He saw the growing controversy as fuel for his larger plan. The more society fixated on superficialities, the sharper the eventual reckoning would be. But Alice couldn't shake the feeling that Elon's calm exterior masked something deeper. "How do you handle it?" she asked him one evening, her voice quiet but firm. They were sitting in his sleek Los Angeles penthouse, the city lights sprawling below them. All the judgment, the constant noise. "Doesn't it get to you?" Elon leaned back, his expression unreadable. People will always have opinions, he said, but opinions don't change reality. What matters is knowing your purpose and staying focused on it. Alice frowned, sensing the detachment in his words. That's easy for you to say. You've built this incredible empire. People respect you for what you've accomplished. I'm not sure they even see me as a person. Elon's gaze softened, just a fraction. Alice, he said, leaning forward, you're more than what they say. You've spent your life helping others, building something real. That's what I see, and it's what the world will see too, eventually. His words comforted her, if only briefly. Still, the weight of public opinion bore down heavily. When she accompanied him to a tech summit a week later, the whispers in the crowd were louder than ever. Is that really his fiancée? One man muttered to his companion, not bothering to lower his voice. She doesn't fit the part, the other replied with a smirk. Alice heard every word, her face flushing as she forced herself to keep walking, her hand gripping Elon's tightly. Elon noticed the tension and turned sharply toward the men. Is there something you'd like to say directly? He asked, his voice cold and commanding. The two men stammered, clearly caught off guard. No, Mr. Musk, nothing at all. One of them mumbled before quickly walking away. Cowards, Elon muttered under his breath before turning back to Alice. Ignore them. They're not worth your energy. Alice nodded, but her heart ached. The confrontation had only reinforced her fears. Even in Elon's world of progress and innovation, the shadows of prejudice loomed large. Meanwhile, Richard Kingsley was beginning to notice the storm brewing around Elon's engagement. From his polished office in Manhattan, Richard smirked as he flipped through articles and tabloid headlines. Musk's lost his touch, he mused to himself. This circus will bury him. But as the days went by, Richard's amusement gave way to irritation. The engagement, instead of fading into irrelevance, had ignited a cultural debate that placed Elon, and by extension, Alice, at the center of attention. The world wasn't just talking about appearances anymore. They were questioning deeper values. For Richard, it was an unwelcome reminder of everything he despised. Watching Elon use his influence to challenge societal norms infuriated him, but he couldn't quite figure out why. What was Musk playing at? Unbeknownst to him, Elon's plan was working. But what Elon hadn't anticipated was how much the backlash would weigh on Alice, and how deeply her quiet strength would begin to unsettle his own carefully maintained facade. Elon had always been a man driven by numbers, data, and results. Yet, the more time he spent with Alice, the more he realized how little he understood about the quiet force that drove her. She rarely spoke about herself, preferring to steer conversations toward others, her patients, her colleagues, or the countless families who depended on her charity. But one evening, as they shared a rare quiet moment at her modest apartment, Elon began to see the pieces of her world that she had carefully kept hidden. Alice's apartment was a far cry from the grandeur Elon was accustomed to. It was small but warm, filled with photographs of smiling children, handwritten thank you notes, and shelves overflowing with books about medicine, psychology, and philosophy. A well-worn couch and a faded coffee table told the story of a woman who valued purpose over luxury. As Elon sipped the tea she had prepared, chamomile, her favorite, he noticed a framed photograph on the wall. It showed Alice surrounded by a group of children in hospital gowns, their faces lit with joy despite their obvious frailty. "Who are they?" he asked, nodding toward the picture. Alice glanced at the photo, her expression softening. That was taken 3 years ago. They're some of the kids from Hopewell's pediatric wing. Most of them were undergoing treatment for cancer. Elon leaned forward, intrigued. You don't just fundraise for Hopewell, do you? You're in the trenches with them. She nodded slowly, her fingers tracing the edge of her teacup. I've been working there for almost a decade now. When I started, we didn't have much. A few volunteers, borrowed equipment, barely enough funding to keep the lights on. But the need was so great. Families would come to us as their last hope, desperate for care they couldn't afford elsewhere. I couldn't turn them away. Her voice trembled slightly, but she pressed on. Over time, I started pouring my own savings into the center. I couldn't stand seeing kids lose their chance at life, because of money. And when we started the pediatric wing, it became my mission. It's everything to me. Elon studied her, his mind processing the enormity of what she had revealed. "You're not just a nurse," he said finally. "You're funding this yourself." Alice laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "I wouldn't say I'm funding it. It's more like patching holes in a sinking ship. Every month, I scrape together what I can to cover the costs insurance won't touch. Sometimes it's rent money, sometimes it's more. But the way I see it, those kids need it more than I do." Her words hit Elon harder than he expected. He had always prided himself on his philanthropy, the billions he had pledged to solving global problems. But Alice's sacrifices were something else entirely. She wasn't leveraging wealth or influence. She was giving away parts of herself, piece by piece, without expecting recognition or reward. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. Alice shrugged. "I don't do it for applause, Elon. Besides, I figured someone like you wouldn't understand what it's like to have to choose between keeping the lights on and saving a life." Elon bristled at the comment, but there was no malice in her tone, just honesty. And she was right. He had never faced that kind of choice. His wealth had insulated him from the harsh realities Alice navigated every day. Yet, as he looked at her, he felt something shift. For the first time in years, he felt humbled. "Do you ever think about walking away?" he asked after a long pause. "Letting someone else take the burden?" Alice shook her head firmly. "Every time I think about quitting, I see their faces, the kids, the parents, their hope. It's fragile, but it's there. And as long as I can give them even a little more time, it's worth it." Elon leaned back, his mind racing. He had initiated their relationship with clear motives, but Alice's dedication was forcing him to confront something he hadn't planned for, a profound respect for the woman she was. This wasn't just about defying societal norms or one-upping Richard Kingsley anymore. Alice was showing him a depth of humanity he hadn't realized he craved. As the night wore on, they talked more about her patience, her dreams, and the small victories that kept her going. And as Elon listened, he realized he was no longer thinking about the plan. For the first time in a long while, he was simply present. Elon Musk had always been a man of control. His public persona, his ambitions, his relationships, all carefully orchestrated, moving with precision like the gears of a finely tuned machine. But as the weeks turned into months, something unexpected began to unravel within him. Alice Monroe, with her unwavering kindness and quiet strength, was slipping past his defenses, dismantling the carefully constructed walls he had built around himself. It started with the little things. He found himself thinking about her more often, replaying their conversations in his mind. Her laughter lingered like a melody, her words echoing long after she had left the room. He began looking forward to their time together, not as a means to an end, but as a reprieve from the relentless grind of his world. It unnerved him. This wasn't part of the plan. One evening, Elon sat in his sprawling office, his attention divided between a dozen open tabs on his monitor. Financial reports, engineering updates, and PR strategies filled the screen, but his focus was elsewhere. On his desk lay a photograph Alice had given him, a group of children at Hopewell Charities, holding a banner that read, "Thank you, Mr. Musk," in bright, crayon-colored letters. Their smiles were infectious, yet Elon's gaze kept drifting back to the woman standing off to the side. Alice, with her radiant grin and tired eyes, looked every bit the hero they believed her to be. "Elon," his assistant's voice interrupted through the intercom, "your meeting with the Mars Initiative Board starts in 10 minutes. "I'll join virtually," he replied absently, his fingers brushing over the edge of a photograph. "Clear my in-person schedule for tomorrow." "Yes, sir." It wasn't like him to sideline work for personal matters, but the need to see Alice again felt urgent, almost magnetic. The following day, he arrived unannounced at the pediatric wing of Hopewell Charities. The building was modest, its paint peeling in places, but the warmth inside was palpable. Children's drawings adorned the walls, and the air buzzed with the hum of quiet determination as nurses and volunteers bustled about. Elon spotted Alice at the far end of the hallway, crouched beside a young boy in a wheelchair. She was holding a stethoscope to his chest, her expression focused but gentle as she explained something to him in a soothing tone. The boy nodded, his apprehension giving way to a shy smile. Elon watched the scene unfold, a strange mixture of admiration and unease settling over him. "Didn't expect to see you here," Alice said as she approached him, her voice tinged with surprise but not displeasure. "Isn't there a rocket waiting for you somewhere?" Elon chuckled, though it felt forced. "I wanted to see this place for myself. You talk about it so much. I figured it was time." Alice gestured for him to follow her, leading him through the maze of small rooms and bustling activity. She introduced him to the staff, who regarded him with awe, and to the children, who peppered him with questions about spaceships and robots. For once, Elon wasn't the center of attention. Alice was. She moved through the chaos with ease, her presence a calming force. As they walked, Elon noticed the strain behind her smiles. The endless hours, the emotional toll, and the financial burden were evident in every line on her face. He realized with startling clarity that Alice's world was one of constant sacrifice, a world he had never truly understood. Later, as they sat in her tiny office, sipping coffee from mismatched mugs, Alice finally broke the silence. "Why are you really here, Elon?" He hesitated. The truth was tangled in layers of pride, fear, and something he wasn't ready to name. "I just wanted to see what drives you," he said, his tone lighter than he felt. Alice gave him a long, searching look. "I think you've already seen it," she said simply. "The question is, why does it matter to you?" Her words hit him harder than he expected. Why did it matter? He had told himself from the beginning that this was about Richard Kingsley, about making a statement to the world. But sitting there, with Alice looking at him as though she could see straight through him, he wasn't so sure anymore. That night, as Elon returned to his penthouse, he stood by the window overlooking the sprawling city. The lights blinked like stars below him, but for the first time, they felt distant and unimportant. In his chest, a tension he couldn't quite name began to grow. He had started this journey with a clear goal, but now the lines were blurring. Alice wasn't just part of his plan anymore. She was becoming something else entirely, something that terrified him. And for a man like Elon Musk, accustomed to mastering every aspect of his life, the realization that he might be losing control was the most unsettling thing of all. Richard Kingsley's invitation arrived on embossed cardstock, as ostentatious as the man himself. The event, touted as a celebration of excellence in innovation, was a glittering excuse for Richard to parade his wealth and influence. Elon recognized it immediately for what was a stage. Richard wanted a public spectacle, a chance to measure his perceived superiority against the world's most scrutinized billionaire. Elon accepted without hesitation. This was the moment he had been waiting for. The plan to humiliate Richard by exposing his prejudice was nearing its culmination, and the gala would provide the perfect audience. What he hadn't anticipated was how Alice would feel about it. "You're taking me to this?" she asked, her tone cautious, as she examined the invitation. They were seated in her modest living room, the faint hum of the heater filling the silence. Elon nodded, his expression unreadable. "Richard will be there. It's important." Alice set the invitation down, folding her hands tightly in her lap. "Important for what?" "You've been vague about why this man matters so much." Elon hesitated, carefully choosing his words. "He's someone who needs to be challenged. His influence is toxic, Alice. This isn't just about me or him. It's bigger than that." She didn't look convinced. "And you think taking me to a room full of people who'll judge me before I even step through the door is a way to do it?" Elon leaned forward, placing a hand over hers. "They're going to judge, yes, but they'll also see you, Alice. They'll see who you really are, and that's what matters." Alice searched his face, unsure whether to feel reassured or unsettled. Finally, she nodded. "All right, I'll go, but don't expect me to play the part of someone I'm not." The night of the gala arrived, and the venue, a sprawling mansion on the outskirts of Manhattan, was a study in extravagance. Chandeliers cast golden light over polished marble floors, and the air buzzed with the chatter of the elite. Alice, in a navy blue gown that hugged her curves tastefully, entered the room with Elon at her side. Her nerves were palpable, but she carried herself with quiet dignity. The room turned to watch them almost immediately. Whispers flared like sparks, a mix of astonishment, mockery, and curiosity. "Is that Musk's fiancée?" someone murmured. "She's not what I expected," another voice chimed, dripping with condescension. Alice ignored the comments, her grip on Elon's arm tightening as they made their way through the crowd. Elon, for his part, was as calm and composed as ever, exchanging nods and greetings with familiar faces. But his focus never left Alice. He could feel the weight of every gaze on her, every whispered word, and it stoked something protective within him. And then Richard made his entrance. The man was impeccably dressed, his tailored suit screaming affluence. He moved through the crowd like a shark in calm waters, his smile all teeth. His eyes landed on Elon and Alice. His grin widened. "Elon," Richard called, striding over with exaggerated warmth. "And this must be the lovely fiancée I've heard so much about." Alice extended her hand politely, but Richard barely glanced at it before looking her over, his expression betraying the faintest hint of disdain. "Alice, is it? Welcome to the circus. I trust Elon's told you how these things work. Smiles, champagne, and just the right amount of gossip." Alice's jaw tightened, but she forced a smile. "I think I'll manage." Richard laughed, his gaze flicking between them. "Oh, I'm sure you will. It takes a strong person to stand in the shadow of a man like Elon." Elon's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Richard. Shadows have a way of shifting." The tension between them was palpable, but Richard only smirked, clearly enjoying the discomfort he was causing. "Let's catch up later, old friend," he said, clapping Elon on the shoulder before disappearing into the crowd. As the night wore on, Alice found herself drawn to the fringes of the party, away from the scrutinizing eyes of the elite. She stood by a large window, gazing out at the city lights, when Elon approached. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for everything." Alice turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Why are we really here, Elon? What are you trying to prove?" Before he could answer, a voice rang out behind them. "Ladies and gentlemen, your attention, please." Richard had taken the stage, a glass of champagne in hand. His tone was jovial, but his eyes gleamed with malice. "I'd like to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate the finest minds of our generation. And what better way to do that than with a toast to old friends and new beginnings?" The crowd applauded politely, but Richard's gaze was fixed on Elon and Alice, his smirk widening as he prepared to make his move. Elon tensed, his jaw tightening. This was the moment he had anticipated, the moment the stage was set for a confrontation unlike any other. The clink of Richard's champagne glass echoed through the opulent hall, a delicate sound that contrasted sharply with the venom hidden in his words. All eyes turned to him, the chatter dying down as his voice commanded the room. He stood with the ease of a man who thrived in the spotlight, his expression an infuriating mix of charm and malice. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone oozing congeniality, "what an extraordinary evening this is. Gathered here, we have the brightest minds, the boldest innovators, and, of course, the most captivating stories of our time." He let the words linger, scanning the audience with a practiced smile. Then his gaze landed squarely on Elon and Alice. His smile sharpened into something crueler. "And speaking of captivating stories," he continued, lifting his glass in a mock toast, "let's take a moment to appreciate the man of the hour, Elon Musk. A true pioneer, a visionary, a man who continues to surprise us all. And tonight, it seems, Elon has gifted us with yet another unexpected innovation, redefining what it means to choose a partner." The room tensed as a ripple of laughter broke out, scattered and awkward, like the hesitant applause of an audience unsure if they should join in. Alice's heart sank. She could feel every pair of eyes darting toward her, some pitying, others judgmental. Her chest tightened, and her grip on Elon's arm faltered. Elon, stone-faced, tightened his own grip on her hand, anchoring her. "He's trying to provoke us," he murmured, his voice low enough for only her to hear. But Richard wasn't done. Emboldened by the uncomfortable laughs he'd elicited, he gestured toward Alice with the flourish of a man presenting a prize. Alice Munro, everyone. A nurse, a philanthropist, and, might I add, quite the unconventional choice for a man of Elon's stature. But then again, he added, smirking, innovation is all about breaking the mold, isn't it? Alice's cheeks burned. She fought to keep her composure, but the humiliation was mounting. The room felt too bright, the air too heavy. She wanted to disappear, to slip away from the stares that seemed to pierce her like daggers. "Elon, I can't," she whispered, stepping back. But Elon turned to her, his eyes steady and fierce. "You can," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You've stood stronger than anyone else in this room. Don't let him take that from you." Richard, sensing the tension, continued his performance. "Of course," he said with faux sincerity, "beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And we all know Elon has always had a unique vision." The insult hit like a slap. Alice felt her throat tighten. But before she could respond, Richard added the final twist of the knife. He waved toward the stage, where a statuesque woman appeared, her gown shimmering under the chandeliers. "This," Richard announced grandly, "is Genevieve. A brilliant mind, a philanthropist in her own right, and, I dare say, an embodiment of grace and ambition. Ladies and gentlemen, isn't she stunning?" Genevieve glided to his side, her smile polished, her beauty undeniable. She glanced toward Elon and Alice, her gaze lingering on Alice with a faint air of superiority. Richard leaned toward her, as if sharing a private joke, then turned back to the audience. "Now, I don't mean to draw comparisons," Richard said, feigning innocence. "But in a world where appearance and influence often define success, it's refreshing to see Elon chart his own path." The insult was as subtle as it was vicious, and the crowd, ever keen to avoid discomfort, murmured politely. The humiliation was unbearable. Alice took a shaky breath and turned toward the exit, her vision blurring with tears she refused to let fall. "I need to leave," she whispered, her voice cracking. Elon caught her wrist, his touch firm but gentle. "No," he said, his voice low but resolute. "You don't run. Not from him." Her eyes met his, brimming with hurt. "I can't do this, Elon. I'm not like you." Elon's expression softened, but his tone remained steady. "You're stronger than you think. And this is just noise." Turning toward the stage, Elon stepped forward, his movements deliberate. The crowd hushed as he spoke, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. "Richard," he began, "your obsession with appearances is as transparent as is pathetic. You can parade Genevieve around, mock Alice, and pretend you're making a point, but all you're doing is proving how small you really are." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Richard's smirk faltered, but he quickly recovered. "Careful, Elon," he said, chuckling. "You don't want to sound defensive." Elon ignored him, addressing the room instead. "We're standing in a world on the brink of transformation, one where innovation, empathy, and authenticity matter more than the shallow metrics you cling to, Richard. Alice is the embodiment of those values. She spent her life fighting for others, while you've spent yours protecting your fragile ego." The audience was stunned into silence. Even Genevieve, whose practiced smile had never faltered, looked visibly uncomfortable. Elon's gaze swept the room. "You think strength is about power and beauty, but real strength is standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Real strength is Alice Munro." He turned to Alice then, his voice softening but still carrying the weight of conviction. "And she's 10 times the person anyone here, including me, could ever hope to be." The applause began tentatively but grew into a crescendo that filled the room. Richard, red-faced and flustered, looked as though he'd swallowed something bitter. As Alice stood there, tears glistening in her eyes. She felt a shift, not just in the room, but within herself. Elon's words weren't just a defense. They were a declaration. And for the first time that evening, she felt seen, not as an object of ridicule, but as someone worthy of admiration. Richard had intended to humiliate them, to fracture their resolve. Instead, he had ignited something far more powerful. The applause thundered through the grand hall, an eruption of sound that reverberated off the marble walls. Elon stood tall, his gaze sweeping the room, but his focus remained on Alice. She was motionless, her eyes wide, her lips parted as if struggling to process what had just unfolded. For the first time that evening, she felt the weight of the crowd lift, replaced by something unfamiliar: admiration. Richard Kingsley, however, was not one to retreat quietly. His smirk had long since vanished, replaced by a simmering resentment that burned in his eyes. He raised a champagne glass once more, his voice cutting through the lingering applause. "Well said, Elon," Richard drawled, his tone laced with sarcasm. "You've always been a master of spectacle, but let's not forget, you're as much a showman as I am." The room quieted, the tension shifting as Richard pressed on. "You stand here, painting yourself as a champion of virtue, but let's be honest. You're a businessman, Elon. Everything you do has a purpose, an angle. So, tell us, what's the angle here?" The crowd exchanged nervous glances, their gazes darting between the two men. Alice stiffened, her hands clenching at her sides. She turned to Elon, her voice barely above a whisper. "What is he talking about?" Elon exhaled, his composure wavering for the first time that evening. He glanced at Alice, his expression unreadable, then turned back to Richard. "What I do has always been about more than business," he said firmly. "It's about challenging assumptions, pushing boundaries, including yours." Richard chuckled, shaking his head. "And you expect us to believe this wasn't part of some grand strategy? Marrying a woman like Alice, someone who embodies everything you claim to stand for, wasn't a calculated move?" Alice's breath hitched. She turned to Elon, searching his face for an answer. "Elon," she said, her voice trembling, "is that true?" Elon hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had spent his life navigating high-stakes negotiations, deflecting scrutiny with ease. But this was different. This was Alice. "Yes," he said finally, his voice low but steady. At first, it was strategy. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. The crowd collectively gasped, the atmosphere charged with disbelief. Alice took a step back, her expression a mixture of hurt and betrayal. At first, she repeated, her voice barely audible. "What does that even mean?" Elon reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Alice, listen to me," he pleaded. "When I met you, it was part of a plan. Richard's plan, his prejudice, his arrogance. It's everything I've spent my life fighting against. I wanted to expose it for what it was, and I was, what? A tool." Alice's voice cracked, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "No," Elon said quickly, his voice breaking with emotion. "Not anymore. Alice, you changed everything. What started as a plan turned into something I never expected. I didn't just admire you. I fell in love with you. Your kindness, your strength, your humanity. It made me realize how shallow my motivations were. You made me better." Alice stared at him, her emotions a storm of anger, pain, and confusion. "You used me," she said, her voice shaking. "Even if it's different now, you used me." Elon's shoulders slumped, the weight of her words crushing him. "I know," he admitted, his voice thick with regret, "and I'll never forgive myself for that. But I swear to you, Alice, I love you. Not for the plan, not for the message, just for you." Tears streamed down Alice's cheeks as she shook her head, the pain too raw to reconcile with his words. The crowd, frozen in their collective discomfort, watched in silence as she turned and walked away. The heavy thud of the ballroom doors closing behind her echoed like a final note of judgment. Elon stood there, his chest tight, his mind racing with the realization of what he had just lost. For all his brilliance, for all his carefully laid plans, he had underestimated the cost of manipulating the one person who had shown him what it truly meant to be human. Richard smirked, raising his glass once more. "Well, Musk," he said smugly, "it seems the visionary still has a few lessons to learn." Elon ignored him, his focus already shifting. This wasn't over. Not for Alice, and not for him. He had made a mistake, a colossal, unforgivable mistake, but he wasn't going to let that be the end of their story. Alice stumbled through the ornate corridors of the mansion, her heels clicking against the polished marble floors. The sounds of the party faded behind her, muffled by the pounding of her heart. Her breath came in shallow gasps, her chest tightening with every step. The grandeur around her felt oppressive now, its opulence mocking the turmoil inside her. She didn't stop until she reached the wide-open balcony overlooking the sprawling estate. The cool night air hit her face like a slap, and she gripped the stone railing for support. Tears streamed freely down her cheeks, hot and unrelenting, as the weight of Elon's confession pressed down on her chest. She had trusted him, let herself believe in the fairy tale he had woven. And now, it felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath her. Her mind raced with fragments of their time together. Every shared laugh, every tender moment, every whispered promise, it all felt tainted now, like pieces of a puzzle she could no longer fit together. She had been a pawn, a piece in Elon's intricate game, and even his heartfelt explanation couldn't erase the sting of that betrayal. The sound of footsteps behind her made her stiffen. She didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Alice." Elon's voice was low, almost pleading. "Don't," she said sharply, her voice raw and trembling. She turned to face him, her eyes blazing despite the tears. "You don't get to explain this away." He stopped a few feet away, his usually confident demeanor replaced with something she hadn't seen before: vulnerability. "I'm not here to explain," he said. "I'm here to tell you the truth." She laughed bitterly, the sound hollow. "The truth. Now, after you've already twisted everything we had into some plan to humiliate Richard Kingsley, do you have any idea how that feels?" Elon stepped closer, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "I know I've hurt you, and if I could take it back, I would. But Alice, what we have now, why feel for you? It's real. I swear it." Alice shook her head, wrapping her arms around herself as if to shield against his words. "You don't get to decide what's real, Elon. You lied to me. You used me. And now, you expect me to just believe you love me." "I do love you," he said, his voice breaking. "And I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I can't let you leave like this, thinking I don't care. Because I do, Alice. More than I've ever cared about anything." She stared at him, her anger warring with the flicker of longing in her heart. For a moment, silence hung between them, the night air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Alice exhaled, her voice trembling as she spoke. "You think words can fix this, Elon? That just saying you love me will erase the fact that I was nothing more than a pawn to you?" "You were never just a pawn," he said firmly, his desperation slipping into his tone. "Yes, I started this for the wrong reasons, but somewhere along the way, it stopped being about Richard or proving a point. It became about you, your strength, your heart, everything that makes you who you are. I didn't expect to feel this way, but I do." Alice turned back toward the railing, her grip tightening on the cold stone. "I need time," she said quietly, her words cutting through the stillness. "Time to think. Time to figure out if I can ever trust you again." Elon nodded, though the pain in his eyes was unmistakable. "Take all the time you need," he said softly. "But I'm not giving up, Alice. Not on us." She didn't respond, her gaze fixed on the horizon as tears slipped down her face. After a moment, she heard his footsteps retreating, the sound fading into the night. When she was sure he was gone, she let out a shuddering breath, her emotions crashing over her like a wave. Alice had built her life on resilience, on finding strength in the face of adversity. But tonight, standing alone under the stars, she felt more lost than ever. The days following the gala were an excruciating blur for Elon Musk. He had faced failures before, rockets exploding, projects delayed. But this was different. Those setbacks were technical puzzles to solve. This was the consequence of his own choices, a chasm of pain he had created with the person who mattered most. His sprawling penthouse, with its futuristic design and breathtaking views, felt cavernous and cold. It was a place meant to inspire, but now it served only as a reminder of the emptiness left by Alice's absence. Alice, meanwhile, buried herself in her work at Hopewell Charities. She arrived earlier, stayed later, and volunteered for every task, no matter how small. Cleaning supply closets, reading to children during their treatment sessions, anything to keep herself busy and avoid thinking about Elon. Yet, no matter how many hours she worked, his words lingered in her mind. She couldn't forget the look on his face when he told her he loved her. She couldn't decide what hurt more, the betrayal or the possibility that he had been telling the truth. For Elon, doing nothing wasn't an option. He had always been a man of action, and his mind churned relentlessly as he considered ways to prove to Alice that he wasn't the same man who had crafted that cruel plan months ago. Words would never be enough. Alice deserved more, something tangible, something lasting. The answer came to him one sleepless night as he stared at a photograph Alice had left behind, a picture of her standing with a group of smiling children from Hopewell's pediatric wing. Their faces were alight with joy, the backdrop a simple but tired facility desperately in need of care. The answer wasn't just about Alice. It was about what she stood for. If she could dedicate her life to these children, to a mission so much greater than herself, then so could he. The next morning, Elon launched into action. He called his foundation's executives, instructed his team to prepare logistics, and made sure no detail was overlooked. For a man accustomed to changing the world on a macro scale, this was personal. He didn't want his efforts to feel corporate or distant. He wanted them to reflect Alice's values. The funds were just the beginning. 3 weeks later, Alice arrived at Hopewell Charities before sunrise, her coffee in hand and her thoughts scattered, as they often were these days. The air was crisp, the faint light of dawn creeping across the sky. But as she turned a corner toward the building, she froze. Her coffee cup slipped from her grasp, its contents spilling onto the pavement. The once quiet entrance to Hopewell was now a bustling scene of workers unloading trucks filled with medical supplies. Cranes towered overhead, and construction crews were setting up barriers for what appeared to be a large-scale renovation. A massive banner stretched across the front of the building, its message bold and impossible to ignore. Hopewell Charities Expansion Project, fully funded by the Musk Foundation. Alice's heart pounded as she took in the scene. New hospital beds, state-of-the-art imaging machines, boxes of supplies, all the things Hopewell had desperately needed but could never afford. The construction materials hinted at a long-overdue expansion, something she had only dreamed of. The air buzzed with energy, her colleagues and volunteers running back and forth in awe and excitement. Miss Monroe, Julia, one of the nurses, called out as she rushed over, her face lit with joy. "Did you know about this? It's unbelievable. We're getting everything we've ever needed. They're building a whole new pediatric wing, hiring more staff. This will change everything." Alice barely heard her. Her mind raced, and her stomach churned as realization set in. She knew exactly who was behind this. "No," she murmured, more to herself than Julia. "I didn't know." Before she could process further, a familiar voice reached her ears. "I thought you might like it." Alice spun around to see Elon, standing a few yards away, dressed in his usual understated black coat. His posture was hesitant, his hands stuffed into his pockets as if to stop them from trembling. He looked different, not like the confident mogul who had captivated crowds. There was no arrogance in his stance, no charm hiding in his expression, only vulnerability. "Elon," Alice said, her voice a mixture of shock and suspicion. What is all this? He took a tentative step closer, his gaze steady but softer than she had ever seen it. This is Hopewell's future, he said simply. It's what you and the kids deserve. Alice's emotions warred within her. The sheer scale of his gesture was overwhelming, but it also felt too convenient, too grandiose. You can't just throw money at this and expect everything to be okay, she said, her voice cracking. Do you think this will make up for what you did? Elon shook his head. No, this isn't about making up for what I did. It's about making sure what you do here keeps changing lives, long after I'm gone, if that's what it takes. Alice crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she searched his face for any trace of manipulation. Why now, Elon? Why not months ago? Before all of this? He stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because I didn't see it before. I didn't understand what really mattered. You showed me that, Alice. You made me see the kind of person I want to be. The kind of person you already are. Alice felt her throat tighten, the sincerity in his voice cutting through her defenses. She wanted to hold on to her anger, her pain, but his words carried a weight she couldn't ignore. You think this changes anything? She asked, her voice trembling. That I'll just forgive you because you wrote a big check. No, Elon said softly, his eyes glistening. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm just asking for a chance to prove that I can be better. For you. For them. He gestured toward the building, where workers carried boxes labeled with the names of the children's programs Alice had fought so hard to sustain. For a long moment, Alice said nothing. The chaos around them seemed to fade, leaving only the two of them standing there, their breaths visible in the chilly morning air. Finally, Alice spoke, her voice quiet but firm. This is a good start, she said, but I need time. Time to figure out if I can ever trust you again. Elon nodded, his expression solemn but resolute. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll be here. As Alice walked toward the building, her colleagues rushing to share the news, she felt a mixture of emotions, relief, hope, and the faintest flicker of something she wasn't ready to name. Elon stood outside, watching her go, his heart heavy but his resolve unwavering. For the first time in years, he wasn't chasing a goal or a vision. He was chasing something far greater, redemption. The months following Elon Musk's bold gesture of redemption were transformative for Hopewell Charities. The once cramped facility blossomed into a haven of innovation and care. The new pediatric wing gleamed with state-of-the-art equipment, the walls painted in cheerful murals designed by local artists. Smiles replaced tears on the faces of families who walked through its doors, knowing they would now receive the support they so desperately needed. Alice Monroe threw herself into the work, overseeing the expansion and training the new staff Elon's donation had made possible. The joy in the children's laughter and the relief in their parents' eyes became her fuel. Yet, beneath the surface, her emotions remained complicated. She couldn't deny the good Elon had done, not just for the charity, but for the children whose lives were being saved. But trust was a fragile thing, and hers had been shattered. Elon, for his part, respected the distance she maintained. Though he had helped create a brighter future for Hopewell, he never once used it to pressure her. He communicated through updates about the project, checking in with her colleagues, and occasionally appearing at charity events. Each time he saw Alice, he felt the ache of her absence, but he knew pushing her would only drive her further away. He would wait as long as it took. One crisp autumn evening, Alice found herself walking through the nearly completed pediatric wing. The day's work had wound down, and the hallways were quiet. The soft hum of the air conditioning and the faint scent of fresh paint created a calming atmosphere. She paused at the entrance to one of the new therapy rooms, gazing at the bright, cheerful space. Toys and books lined the shelves, and sunlight filtered through the large windows, casting warm patterns on the floor. She was proud of what they had built, what Elon had made possible. But beneath her pride was a tangle of emotions she couldn't quite unravel. For all the progress Hopewell had seen, her heart remained stuck in the moment Elon had admitted the truth. The memory of his vulnerability, his desperate plea for her forgiveness, haunted her as much as the betrayal itself. Alice. The sound of his voice startled her. She turned to find Elon standing at the doorway, his hands tucked into the pockets of his coat. He looked different, less polished, more human. His usually sharp demeanor was softened by something she couldn't quite name. Hesitation. Hope. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady but cautious. He stepped into the room, his gaze sweeping over the space. "I wanted to see it," he said softly. "It's incredible what you've done here." Alice arched an eyebrow. "What we've done here," she corrected. "This wouldn't exist without you." Elon smiled faintly, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Maybe. But you're the heart of this place, Alice. That was true long before I came into the picture." Her heart gave a small, unexpected tug at his words, but she forced herself to focus. "If this is about the project, you could have emailed me." "It's not about the project," Elon said, his voice firmer now. He stepped closer, his hands dropping to his sides as if to show he had nothing to hide. "It's about us." Alice stiffened. "Elon, please," he interrupted gently, his tone almost pleading. "Let me say this. I know I hurt you. I know I broke your trust. But every decision I've made since that night has been to try and become someone worthy of the faith you had in me." She turned away, crossing her arms. "Do you think that makes everything okay? That what you've done here erases what you did to me?" "No," he admitted, his voice low. "I know it doesn't, and I'm not here to ask for your forgiveness. Not yet. But I want you to know that I've changed, Alice. Not because I had to, but because of you. You showed me what real strength looks like, what it means to put others before yourself, to fight for something bigger than your own ambitions. You taught me that." Alice swallowed hard, her emotions threatening to overwhelm her. "And what happens when the lesson is over?" she asked, her voice trembling. "When you move on to the next big idea or the next grand plan?" Elon's gaze softened. "There is no next, Alice. Not without you." The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. She turned to face him, her eyes searching his for any sign of deception, but all she saw was honesty, vulnerability, love. "I'm not asking for things to go back to how they were," Elon continued. "I know I don't deserve that, but I'm asking for a chance to prove to you that I've changed, that I can be the man you deserve." Alice hesitated, her heart pounding. The pain of his betrayal hadn't vanished, but neither had the memories of the man who had stood by her side, who had defended her in front of the world, who had opened his heart in ways she hadn't expected. After what felt like an eternity, she spoke. "One step at a time," she said softly. "If you're serious about this, about being better, then we'll start with that." A smile broke across Elon's face, tentative but genuine. "One step at a time," he agreed. Months later, Hopewell Charities held the grand opening of its new pediatric wing. The event was a celebration of community and resilience, attended by families, donors, and children whose lives had been touched by the center. Alice stood at the podium, her voice steady as she thanked everyone who had made the transformation possible. "And finally," she said, her gaze sweeping the crowd, "I want to thank someone who believed in this place, even when it was easier not to. Someone who made this dream a reality." Her eyes found Elon, standing near the back of the crowd. For a moment, the world seemed to fall away. She smiled, not the guarded smile she had worn for months, but something real, something full of hope. Later, as the sun set over the sparkling new facility, Elon and Alice walked together along the garden path that wound through the property. Their steps were unhurried, their conversation easy. For the first time, the tension between them had lifted, replaced by a quiet understanding. "I never thought I'd say this," Alice said, glancing at him with a small smile, "but I'm glad you walked into my life." Elon chuckled, his own smile breaking through. "And I'm glad you didn't walk out of mine." As they stood beneath the fading light of the evening sky, the future no longer felt uncertain. Together, they had rebuilt not just a charity, but a bond that would guide them towards something stronger than either of them had imagined.